Hi everyone, my name is Katie Kuzek. I'm the programs chair. Thank you for coming out tonight. Our presenter tonight is Barb Brenner, who really needs no introduction for many of our long-term members who have known her. For those who don't, Barb is she's a long-time ADK member and accomplished thru-hiker, and she will be speaking tonight on her independent thru-hike of that Appalachian Trail. And also with her tonight will be a panel of some of our own members, Mary Ruth Merkel and Sarah Mastro and Katie Rhodes, who was our workshop presenter, and they will be taking part in a panel discussion on women's solo hiking following Barb's presentation. And just out of curiosity, how many people are here tonight because they heard Connections with Evan Dawson? Great, great. And how many people are here tonight who are members but who haven't been here in a long time? Great, okay. Barb has noticed. And without further ado, here's Barb Brenner. Oh, and I'm sorry, hold on one second. Just a quick plug, I always forget this, just a quick plug for our next program on January 11th will be photographer Jeremy Miller. So come out to that as well. And please welcome Barb Brenner.
Thank you, everybody, and I have to give kudos to Katie because she's the one that arranged for that Connections interview today with Evan Dawson. So that was really kind of cool to do and nice to meet him, but all credit goes to her for making that happen. I'm going to try putting this in here, because if you know me, I handshake. Just on a regular basis. And I anticipate having my computer up here, so I need to work with the screen up there. So bear with me in this interesting arrangement here. So I'm Barb Brenner, known as the sunrise hiker on the Appalachian Trail. And let me figure out I just threw up the slide because I think it's exciting to know that there's more women hiking the AT and there are more women getting out and about, and even more importantly, I think it's exciting because their voices are being heard, which I think falls in line with our lineup of presentations of Outside Voices, that there's more published material out there about women hiking solo or with companions. There's more information on the internet about safety for women, and there's just more women sharing their stories. So I think women have been hiking along the time, but not always have the voices been heard. So I think it's great to see those changes. And putting together this presentation, I have to say, took me a long time, not to put together the slides, but man, there is so much information now out there on the internet, on the Appalachian Trail, that I went off on one tangent, and another tangent, and another tangent, and another tangent. So if you're interested in hiking the AT, there's plenty of information out there nowadays. But on the AT, they say now, this was 2018, that bottom bullet, they now say about 40% of thru-hikers are female. So let me share with you a little bit about my journey. As you may know, the Appalachian Trail runs through the 14 eastern United States from Georgia to Maine. And the bottom left-hand picture is me on Springer Mountain. I started on April 4th, 1992, 30 years ago. And that picture in the bottom left is me, and I'm sure you've noticed my hair was a lot darker then. Age has given me a natural coloring of salt and pepper. But the other thing about my hair in that picture is I made the mistake that I went to get it cut before the trail, and the mistake I made, not getting it cut, but the mistake was that I told the hairdresser I was going on a 6-month trip, and she tried to cut it for 6 months. So you see how long it is there? I have to get my hair cut about every 4 weeks. That was 2 weeks worth of growth. So I got a buzz. So anyway, that's on Springer Mountain, pointing to the first blaze. And 186 days later, on October 6th, I was on top of Mount Katahdin at the sign marking the end of the northern end of the Appalachian Trail. And in between, I became known as the sunrise hiker. So my trip started out as a dream, and that's the one-day part of it. That one day, I might do the Appalachian Trail. And I've always enjoyed the outdoors. My birthday parties as a child were campouts. and kind of eased into it. But this chapter, joining the Genesee Valley chapter back in the late 80s, really gave me a push. It got me in touch with people who had similar interests, and I learned a lot about gear and skills and places to go and being out and about. I also found out about the AT because my sister lives in Massachusetts, so I drove on the Mass Pike many, many times underneath where the AT crosses. And the two pictures up there are me actually on that bridge across the Mass Pike when I was actually doing the AT. And I have to admit, I had tears in my eyes because I had walked from Georgia to get to that point instead of driving from Rochester. But the moment I really decided that I didn't want it to just be a dream, I wanted it to be reality. I can picture in my mind, I don't remember where or who I was on the trip with, but it was a Genesee Valley chapter hiking trip, and I was talking to people, and I realized that a lot of the people in the group had the same dream, that they wanted to do the AT. And all of a sudden it dawned on me, unless I did something about that dream, that's all it was going to be. And at that moment, it kicked into about a 3-year plan, that I was going to take a year to read about it and learn about it. I was going to take a year to get ready, and then I was going to go in 1992. That was the plan. I had no idea I was going to really do it. I didn't tell many people about it, because I figured if I told too many people, I would end up changing my mind. So my life for a couple of years became just in case. Just in case I'm going to go, I am going to learn about the AT. I'm going to read as much as I can and watch videos. I shouldn't say videos, there weren't many out. The one I watched over and over again was the video up there called 5 Million Steps. And if you're interested in seeing it, it's been released for free. It's on YouTube. The Vin Weldon who made the video, I actually got to meet him on the AT. He has now posted the video on YouTube. And my favorite book at that time was As Far as the Eye Can See. The internet was not available to go off on daydreaming tangents, so I had to rely on video and books and talking to people and such. But I decided to save my money just in case I was going to go. I was going to improve my gear and my skills just in case I was going to go. And I was going to sell my house just in case I was going to go. And I rented an apartment, which was actually within walking distance of here. It's just down from Oxford and Park Avenue intersection. So I started making big changes in small steps. And as I was putting this presentation together, I realized that process was really similar to doing the AT itself, and that I was taking it one step at a time. So learning about the AT, on the left there were a lot of famous names I had heard about in my research. Earl Schaefer, Ed Garvey, Paul, Warren Doyle, and Dan Wingfoot, Dan Bruce. And Dan Wingfoot had done the thru-hiker's guide, the green book up there, and he was also on the trail when I was hiking it. So the guy in the red hat in the upper right-hand picture up there is Wingfoot. He's giving advice to another fellow thru-hiker whose name was Halitosis Express, his blisters. And so I got to meet Wingfoot during the trip. But I had some local thru-hikers as sources of information. Doug Kane had hiked it the year before I did. He was a member of this chapter. He gave me a lot of advice, and he actually turned out to be my support person when I was on the trail. And the picture on the right is DJ Kitzel. Some of you in this room might know DJ. And I have to tell you the story about, he hiked the trail in 1989, and I have to tell you the story about that picture. When you hit the psychological halfway point of the Appalachian Trail, which is Harper's Ferry, where the Appalachian Trail Conservancy is, they take a picture of you. And now I imagine the picture is digital. But back when I did the trail, the picture was in Polaroids. So they have these notebooks and notebooks and notebooks of Polaroid pictures of hikers thru-hikers that came through. And when I came through with a fellow hiker, which I'll talk more about in a moment, we became number 200 and 201 in the book that year. Yesterday, when I was putting the final touches on this presentation, and I was going to mention DJ, I thought, actually I had been poking around the ATC website, and I saw a link that said that the Polaroids are now digitized. And they have a page where you can actually type in a name of a thru-hiker, either their real name, or their trail name, or their year, and you can find their picture. So that's DJ Kitzel's halfway, psychological halfway point on the Appalachian Trail. I stole his picture off the website. But I thought that was so cool, so I found my picture and other people I liked with it. See, that was one of those tangents. I probably spent 2 hours getting that picture in this slideshow. But if you notice that list I had, it was pretty short on female role models that I could get information from. And really, in thinking back then, the only one I had was that top book by Cindy Ross, who lived in Pennsylvania at the time. She put together this book of her thru-hike in 1979. I think she may have done it in 2 parts, but I don't remember exactly. So I had that as a reference. And I had heard of Grandma Gatewood, Emma Gatewood. And what I had heard of her was that she was an older woman who hiked in Keds sneakers and carried a gunny sack instead of a backpack. And that's about all I knew until a couple of years ago. And to be honest, this kind of makes me mad that I didn't know this back when I was getting ready for the trail, because it was information that was readily available when we talked about it, and it wasn't published and it wasn't out there to know. But she actually hiked the Appalachian Trail 3 times. And I think that is pretty significant that a woman hiked the trail 3 times, and I didn't know about it just a few years ago. When I read the book that was written by her nephew. So she really did a lot for the trail because she had a lot of publicity from it, and she cared a lot about the trail, and she got the word out about the trail. But I always wonder why back in 1990, 91, I didn't know more of that information until her nephew has published it. I did not know about the other woman listed up there, Peace Pilgrim, but she was the first 2,000 miler. Emma Gateway was the first female solo hiker, and Peace Pilgrim was the first female thru hiker. Okay, so just in case, I was doing that for a couple of years in my head. I had an apartment, I saved my money, and then I finally decided I was going. And the moment it changed from just in case to I was going was the moment I walked into my boss's office at Kodak and asked for a leave of absence. Until then, it was always just in case. But as soon as I asked for that leave of absence, I knew that I was going. So everything switched. And I actually gave Kodak a 6-month notice. They declined my leave of absence. I think they thought I was going to go have fun versus work my tail off. But it turned out to be a benefit because it would have been a 6-month leave of absence is what I was asking for. And it took me 6 months and 2 days to hike the trail. Plus, I'm not sure I would have been ready to go back to Kodak after being in the woods for 6 months. So everything in a way has a way of working itself out. So I also now needed to start telling my family and friends that I was going to disappear for 6 months. My apartment, I had to get out of my lease early, so I negotiated with my landlord. And I had to step away from volunteer activities like this chapter. I was program chair at the time, so I kind of had to pass that on to somebody. I had an apartment full of stuff that needed to be stored. And actually, there's some people in this room who helped me move all my stuff from down here on Oxford Street, or Shantz is one of them here, to the storage unit out in Webster. And then I had to find a home for my cats. So one by one, little by little, I was putting my life on hold. And today, one of the questions on connections that somebody had called in, they asked if those of us that were being interviewed, if doing the AT was that we were privileged to be able to step away for 6 months. And I mentioned that I had sold my house and that I had saved money and stuff like that. But what I didn't mention is I feel as if I created the privilege to go. I stopped spending so much, I saved a lot of my money, I got rid of some of my responsibilities and such, and thinking back, I think that would have been my response, is that I created the privilege to be able to step out of my life for 6 months. So I went from just in case to I'm going, and then I had to share with my family and friends that, oh, by the way, I'm going by myself. Getting ready for this presentation, it dawned on me, I never took action to ask somebody to go with me. I never looked for somebody to go with me. I didn't place an ad looking for somebody to be interested in hiking. That was never in my vision to have a partner on the trail. Pretty much my vision was always that I was going to be independent and have all my own equipment. I didn't want to pull somebody along. I didn't want somebody to push me along. So that is how I started out the trail. And really, I was seeking the solo experience, which I have to admit is really kind of hard to get on the AT, even 30 years ago. The AT is a very social trail, especially in the south, especially as the waves of people are going. I imagine if you were a southbounders starting up at Mount Katahdin, it would probably be a little bit quieter up there. But I don't have experience on that. Maybe I'll have to try that someday. But so I struggle sometimes with the lack of solo experience because every night I was camping with somebody. There were only a couple of nights where I camped solo. And the picture on top there are the first 3 guys I met. I met those as 3 gentlemen as I was leaving Springer Mountain. They were camped at a shelter on top. I had tented, and I met them. That's Eric, Steve, and Blaine. And I think it was last year. Blaine is a ranger in Maine, and last year my in-laws live in Maine, and I connected with Blaine, and I actually got to see him, and I gave him a copy of all my slides and some information and stuff. So it's kind of cool to see him. Then it was 29 years later. But I did experience both solo and companionship on the trail. So for the first several weeks, I was totally independent. I'd see people at night at the shelters, and then eventually I had an opportunity to partner. Down on the bottom is a campground called Rainbow Springs. It's just north of the Georgia-South Carolina border. We were in for a town stop, and as you can see, there's quite a few hikers there. The 2 women on the left are 2 sisters that were hiking together. They're 13 years apart in age. The one on the far left, her name is Becky. She had the trail name of Surefoot. She had a pace more similar to mine, which is more like the tortoise. You keep plodding along, you go into town, you do what you need to do, you get out of town, you get on your way. Her sister was more like the hare, and the more like the partying group, where you hike as fast as you can, you get into town, you party, you hang out, you spend several days, and you get back on the trail and you repeat. So their hiking styles were dissimilar. However, they were sharing a tent, sharing a stove, sharing a water filter, sharing everything. It was at this town stop that they had additional equipment sent. So at this town stop, they duplicated everything, and when they left here, they were both hiking independently. Becky did finish. You'll see her on top of Mount Katahdin with me, and Susie went home in New York State near Greymoor Monastery. So I did have an opportunity to partner with Becky because after several weeks of kind of having similar pace, being in similar camping sites and such, we thought maybe it'd be kind of cool to end together on Katahdin. But as you know, when you hike with somebody, it's not always rosy. We did end up with disagreements because even though we had a similar pace, we had a similar drive. I had more of a drive of let's push on, get a few more miles in our bucket, get ahead of things. Lydia, you can probably relate to that. And Becky was more the, well, let's stop here. And I'd be more, well, let's put in a few more miles. So we came to the agreement that I got us to Katahdin, and she made sure we didn't get there too quickly. So it was a win-win situation, because I didn't want to really end my trail life too soon, but I did really want to get to Katahdin. So it worked out well, even though we would have the disagreements sometimes at the end of the day. That comes with being tired and cranky and everything else. It did, in the long run, make it easier. Because seldom were we both down on the same day. And that really sucked when that happened. But usually one could pick up the other spirits and keep things moving. And it did help with security. I felt a little bit more comfortable hitchhiking when there were 2 of us than if I had to hitchhike by myself. In those days, we didn't have cell phones. They called it Uber to pick you up at a trail crossing. You had to get yourself from the trail crossing to town. And it was also helpful in reading people and situations in case something didn't feel quite right to one of us. You could share it with the other. In the end, it turned out to be a huge benefit, and it also paid off for this presentation, because as I was putting it together, there was somebody in the presentation I wanted to mention, but for the life of me, I could not remember his name. So I emailed Becky and I said, hey, remember that person we met in such and such and such and such? And she responded back with the name. So it came in handy even for this presentation, because she's the only one that could share the memories as close to my memories as possible. So I had to tell family and friends, and I'm just looking at my time here. Of course, they would say, what, are you crazy? Like, who wants to go out and sleep in the woods for however many days in the rain and such? But I have to admit, I got excellent support from this chapter, tremendous support from this chapter, and I learned a lot from the chapter. My friends were very supportive once they got over the, what, are you crazy, her? And I even had some friends who told me that they were jealous. They wish they just could pack up and go like I was doing. And my family, there were mixed reactions, and I'll come back and talk about that. But when somebody did say to me, "What, are you crazy?" I think in hindsight, it really just bounced off of me because I really wanted to go. I wanted to go so badly, it didn't really matter what somebody else said to me. And then they say, "Aren't you afraid?" We'll talk more about that in a moment. And to be honest, I think I was more afraid about quitting my job, what that was going to do to the rest of my life and my financial security and all of that. So the hardest part for me for hiking the AT was actually quitting my job. So safety. The very first book I ever did read about the Appalachian Trail was The Murder on the Appalachian Trail. It was about a murder in 1981. It was a true story. I picked it up in the discount bin in Kmart in China. But there have been only 13 murders on the Appalachian Trail, which if you think about it is not that many. They're shown in, well, it's true. How many car accidents, fatalities have there been this year? Think about that. When you guys get in a car every single day, right? So the risk on the AT, yeah, there are wackos out there. Hopefully your path doesn't cross with it, but we get in a car every single day. I think that risk is much, much higher. So that's a schematic of showing where the murders have been. And not only did I read about the murder before I got on the trail, but the pictures on the right-hand side brought the concept of having a murder on the Appalachian Trail back to me. Because that other picture, the woman in the green by the back end of the car, her name is Marla Hood. Her brother, Jeffrey Hood, and his girlfriend, Molly LaRue, were killed on the trail in 1990, 2 years before I went. And they were murdered in the shelter that this picture in the bottom was taken at that I stayed in, with 2 other people that night. That shelter has now been removed and replaced with a different shelter. But even when I was on the trail, the concept that you could be murdered on the trail was forefront of my mind. So telling family and friends, I said there was mixed reaction in my family. My dad's reaction was, "What about your job?" And then after I explained, he said, "What about your job? But what about your job?" So that's all he could focus on the surface was, "What about my job?" My mom was concerned about my safety. My sister from California was extremely concerned about my safety to the point where she chewed me up one side and down the other and told me that I couldn't go. And I said I was going anyway, and she said, "Well, if I tell Mom and Dad how dangerous it is," because when you're in California, all you hear about the Appalachian Trail is the bad stuff, the murders. And I said, "Well, if you tell Mom and Dad, you're just going to make them worry for 6 months, so that wouldn't be a very good idea." So she did not tell my Mom and Dad. And when I was on the trail, the next bullet down where it says news break, that's a quote from a letter she sent me. So she's cruising along in the letter telling me everything going on with her husband and family and job and everything. And then, boom, in the middle of the letter it says news break. They acquitted those LA police officers who beat up Rodney King. Wow, there are big riots going on in LA. Stay on the trail and in the woods bar. The world is getting weird. So by the time I came off the trail, she was in support of me being on the trail. In fact, in this picture in the bottom right, she is the second person from the left. My mom and dad are on the right. The woman whose brother was murdered on the trail, and by the way, her name Marla Hood, she was finishing her brother's thru-hike, and she had friends hiking with her, the other 2 women that were in the picture before, and they're actually in this picture too. So she was finishing her brother's thru-hike. We happened to run into him in Shenandoah's. That's also where my sister from California brought my parents to visit me. And I'm pretty sure I did not tell my sister or my parents that the other people joining us for dinner there were on the trail because the woman's brother was murdered 2 years earlier. Pretty sure I did not tell them that. But I also went into it with my eyes open. I left a letter in a sealed envelope that Doug Kane, my support person, was supposed to give to my family if something happened to me. And the first line of the letter is what is quoted there, which is, if you are reading this card, then something went wrong with my trip. And then the next part of the message said, I recognize the risk going into this, and I accept the risk, and if something happened, I'm sorry. But I went into it with my eyes open. So I hit success, day 1, I'm going on the trail. And when you get on the trail, it is a really weird feeling, because it's no longer a dream. It's grounded in reality and blisters and rain, and you get familiar with the saying on the right-hand side, no pain, no rain, no man. Okay, the good news is that is not a picture of my feet. Those were somebody else's feet. Mine may have looked like that at some point, but. And then this rain was in the middle of the trip, and in 1992 was a very, very wet year. This section of the trail was known as a scarce water area. And as you can see in this bottom right-hand corner, we had no problem finding water. Everything was just pouring. So I started thinking about life. You have lots of time to think about on the trail. I started thinking of what the next dream was. I'm still working on that part. And I hiked alone during the day. So I got the trail named Sunrise Hiker because I was the first one up and out. And actually in the beginning they wanted to call me Mrs. Rogers, which I do not want, because I would start singing It's a Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. And that's how they shut me up. As soon as they started calling me Mrs. Rogers, I did not sing anymore. But I became the Sunrise Hiker because I got up early and I left first. In the beginning, I was only going 10 miles a day, and my colleagues that I met along the way, those are those first 3 guys again, they were sticking to my similar pace, so we're all ending up in the same shelter at night. So we would let each other know where we were headed, and then during the day we'd be hiking alone on the trail. So, safety on the trail. Precautions that I took. Well, the first precaution I took was I had my buddy George. Early in the trail, I came across a couple of guys, and they were like, "Are you hiking solo?" And I wanted to say yes. I really wanted to say yes. I mean, how cool for a woman to say and let others know that it is possible to hike solo. But how stupid to tell somebody that, right? So in my head, I'm like, I want to tell them, but nope, that's not a wise decision. So instead, I said, nope, I'm not hiking by myself. And oh, by the way, I don't like to lie. I said, my buddy George is coming. He's right behind me. And so from that point forward, my backpack got the name I still use that backpack, so George is still with me. When I come to a road crossing, I would hang back. I wouldn't walk out. If I heard a car coming and I was approaching a road crossing, I would stay back in the woods so they couldn't see me. If I was too far out and I thought I wouldn't be able to get back in the woods and they would see me, I would turn around before they got near me, so they would be thinking I was heading south. So if they wanted to come back and mess with me, hopefully they would end up going in the wrong direction. So those are just a couple of the games that I play. I shared my daily plans with my fellow thru-hikers. I signed the register, so I was leaving a trail where I had been. And when you're hiking by yourself, it's always good to pay attention to the details. For example, there was one road crossing we came to, we sat, we took a break. This is when Becky and I were hiking together. And as we were sitting there, a pickup truck with a cab on the back pulled in and just sat there. And it was really, really just kind of strange. It was very, very odd. And I reread my journal to get ready for this presentation, and I noticed in my journal I had written down the guy's license plate number. So I grabbed the detail of his license plate number, so if he followed us and he did something, at least there'd be some record, hopefully, that could track it back to him. These are the moments I had concern on the trail. The worst night I had on the trail was on top of Smarts Mountain, and I think that's in New Hampshire. We were staying at this lovely accommodation up in the upper right-hand corner, which looks like a terrible place, but how wonderful. It had 4 walls, roof, window and door openings, no glass or door to close, but it was just great accommodation. I happened to be there with Becky and another thru-hiker, Bobcat, who's in the bottom right-hand picture here. And as we're drifting off to sleep after it was dark, a bunch of high schoolers, a big crowd, came up on top of the mountain and were partying and drinking and throwing up and literally screwing around to the top of the fire tower and walking by the shelter and pounding it to wake us up and just being very disruptive. And we were totally, totally outnumbered, and they were totally, totally drunk. So we were trying to be still and not let them know how many of us there were. I certainly didn't want them to know what our gender was. And so we tried to just hang on and make it through the evening. Eventually, somewhere around, I don't know, 2, 3 o'clock, somewhere in there, maybe 4, while we're not getting any sleep, Bobcat who, he looks like a biker, doesn't he? And he had a long braided tail, a ponytail in his hair. He got up and stood out on the porch and just yelled at him and said, if you're going to go to sleep, get in here and go to sleep. If not, get off the mountain. And they did it. So that was good. But meanwhile, we've been scared out of our wits. Just to end that story, the next morning, a bobcat caught up with Becky and I on the trail. And he looked at us and he said, I know you wanted to make a lot of noise this morning to get back at him. He goes, but I got him for you. And he held out his finger, and on the end of his finger were their car keys. He stole their car keys. They didn't know. So we got a good laugh out of that, and then we decided we should get on our feet and get hiking and get the hell farther away from here. One day on the trail, antisocial behavior you have to watch out for. There's some folks who choose the trail as their life and they hang out. And this was the gentleman, I had to ask Becky what his name was because I forgot it. His name's Ward Leonard. If you search the internet, you'll find him referred to as the Boogie Boy. He lived on the trail. I think he's hiked it, 10 numerous times. He had the fastest known time of 60 days to hike the trail. He had a huge ego. But he had some emotional issues, and as long as you were below him in terms of skill and knowledge, and he was fine. But if you were at his level or tried to prove yourself more than him, he got very angry to the point, I heard the story that one night, I wasn't at the shelter, but he got angry at the folks in the shelter that he was outside the shelter all night long, pitching stones at the shelter throughout the night, just to keep the guys inside awake and annoy them. So he had some antisocial behavior that we had to watch out for. Homeless, we came across 2 homeless guys in Virginia that were on the trail. They had 1 sleeping bag, a cup of coffee. I think one guy had 1 sneaker. So my biggest concern that night was for my food. I actually went to sleep that night in my tent with my food hung on a branch right above my tent. So if a bear came, I was doomed. But at least from the homeless guys, hopefully I was going to retain my food. Gunshots, I started out early one morning, and as I was going down the trail, gunshots, it sounded like they were going across the trail, so I wasn't quite sure what to do with that because I was by myself. And I just decided that I was just going to start yelling, hiker on the trail, hiker on the trail, hiker on the trail, and make as much noise as I could, and the shots stopped. And I had heard of a rape that was south of us, so that was a little disconcerting because nobody wants to hear that on the trail. And the truck guy in the parking lot I already told you about. So if you think, there's 5, maybe 6 items up there. I was on the trail 186 days. So really, it's not a huge safety concern to be on the Appalachian Trail, at least in my opinion. Maybe if I was one of those murdered folks. Sorry. Okay, my 2 cents as a solo, to share recommendations as a solo hiker. 1, only solo hike if it feels right for you. For some people it's going to feel right and great, and for other people it's not. So it's something that you only do if it feels good for yourself. Start with short trails like Linden Ponds Park. Get familiar with the trails, re-hike them, go for longer, get comfortable being out by yourself when you can go home at night. I recommend learn basic survival skills such as follow water downhill. I'll come back to that in just a moment. First aid, it's good to have a good first aid background and realize if you're by yourself that you will be the patient and the caregiver. So what you can do while you're waiting, and it actually builds into the next one. If you're injured, it's great to be on a well-traveled trail because all you got to do is put yourself in the middle of the trail and somebody will come along eventually, especially on the AT. Somebody will come along, especially in the southern part of it. We were on the Northville Placid Trail this year, and I was honestly surprised on how few hikers we saw on the Northville Placid Trail. I actually thought it was going to be a busy highway, and we did have a 2-day section where we saw nobody. We had several days where we maybe saw 1 person, but it was a little different traffic than on the AT. But if you're first aid and you get injured, think about the fact that while you're waiting for somebody to come help you, what can you do versus moan and groan and feel sorry for yourself. You can be a little bit more productive and write down the information of what time you got hurt, how you're feeling, what your vital signs are, things like that. You can actually turn into a wilderness caregiver for first aid. I guess it'd be something to occupy your mind too, right? Leave an itinerary is always a great idea, and these suggestions are great whether you're solo or with companions. So leave an itinerary, whether it's just a note upside down on the driver's seat of your car, or with a friend at home, or with a hiker you met in the shelter that morning that you're going to see in the evening, so that somebody knows where you're going to be. And then leave breadcrumbs whenever you can. So write in registers with a date. Check in when possible if you're going to make a phone call. We were in Long Lake while we were doing Northville Classic Trail, and our cell phone was wacky. We could not get cell phone reception to try and call and tell my sister, who was our contact person, that we were going to be leaving the next day. And it's getting to be 9 o'clock at night, and I was panicking. It's like, there's no way we can leave town without telling my sister that we made it this far, because she will be calling the rangers the next day if she doesn't hear from us. I was going to go downstairs and beg somebody in the bar to use their cell phone. When Lydia finally figured out if we take the chip out of the card, out of the phone, and put it back in without losing it in between, the phone actually ended up working. So we were able to call. It's a good idea to take pictures of signs on the trail, so if something does happen to you, your camera becomes a record of where you've been. And never share your personal details. Sometimes you have to make up stories when they ask you questions, like my buddy George behind me, or where are you staying? Tell them a different shelter, or you're heading in a different direction, or you're going to get off the trail, or where your car is parked. You don't always have to give people the correct information when they ask a question. And never share your itinerary, unless it's with somebody that's keeping track of you. Trust your gut. If something doesn't feel right or creepy, go with that, because it's probably true. Do your best not to threaten or engage the individual, like Ward Leonard, who has had social behavior issues. He would be an individual that I would act like a novice to, because I did not want to engage him or anger him. Note any memorable characteristics, like tattoos and things, and if you feel uncomfortable, seek out a populated location, which is a little easier to do on the AT and the south end of it. And if you can, report suspicious persons or activities, because if something does happen, they have your report to start tracking down somebody. Okay, a little more of my 2 cents. The top book, that is called When You Find My Body, is about a woman whose trail name was Inchworm. She was on the AT up in Maine by herself, and she went off trail to go pee, because when they tell you when to go off trail, go a ways. And she did, but in Maine it's kind of dense, and when she was done doing her duties, she could not find the trail. Isn't that bizarre? It's kind of hard to believe, but it's very true. And so she decided she would find a higher place, so she could get cell phone reception. So she pushed into the woods further, and she couldn't get cell phone reception. She ended up getting lost, and ended up living 23 days while they were searching for her. And 2 years later, they found her remains. What they did say is she was near a water source, and this is the part where they recommend that you learn survival skills, such as follow water downstream. If she had followed the water source she was camped next to, 45 minutes later, she would have been at a road that would have intersected the AT. But she basically didn't stay put in the beginning when she got lost. She went in deeper, she got further lost, and then stayed put at that point, but they could not locate her. Which way? The bottom story is from this book, Old Lady on the Trail. It's a woman who, I think starting, well, it says from the year 2003 to 2017, she was in her 60s when she started, she finished in her 70s. She section hiked the AT, the BCT, and the Continental Divide, so she did the Triple Crown. But this is a quote out of her book. It says, "The AT can have a sameness about it much of the time. After I stopped for a break, I had to think hard to remember which way I had come from and which way I was going to, as the rhododendron tunnel to the left looked exactly like the rhododendron tunnel to the right." So when you're by yourself, you have to pay more attention to the detail. Which way are you going? How far should you go off the trail to pee? If there's nobody around, don't go off the trail too far if you can't see the trail. This summer when we were on the NPT, we did one campsite, one camp evening that was not yet a campsite. We were on stealth camp because we wanted to get closer to Long Lake. As we took a break during the day, And I looked around me and I saw how dense things were around me. Because, you know, they say when you camp off trail, you should go 150 feet, right? 150 feet is what, half a football field? So I sat there and thought, if I went off 150 feet, if Lydia and I went off 150 feet, and somebody came and attacked us and left our bodies, nobody would find us. They did not know where we were. We went off itinerary because we were going to push in to get closer into Long Lake, and we were going to be out of sight from the trail itself. So sometimes you have to break the rules for safety reasons. That rule is in place when a lot of people are sharing, and in this case, nobody was coming around. We camped very close to the trail that evening in case something happened to us. Hopefully you guys could come find our bodies, was our plan. Okay, I made it. 186 days. I went from day 1 to 186. I want to show a little clip from a video I put together when I came off the trail. It's only the main section. The name of my video is Faces, Places, and White Blazes. It's the faces I saw on the trail, so you don't see a lot of my face in it. It's mostly what I saw, and places I saw in white blazes, because that's what you follow when you're on the trail. The section you're going to see includes going up Mount Katahdin. We woke up at 1:30 in the morning to start our hike. We wanted to be on top of the mountain at 7:30. We did get on top of the mountain at 7:30 in the morning. We were hoping to see the sunrise. And we went through 3 sets of batteries because it was dark. The pictures over here on the right are what we saw coming down. That's what we went up in the dark. And we were the only 2 people on top of Mount Katahdin, which was awesome. I went back a year later and there must have been 40 people on top of Katahdin. I couldn't believe it. So it was a treat to be up there with just Becky. And then the last thing I have to say before I show the video is what goes up must come down. So you hit the sign on top of Mount Katahdin, which is the official end of the Appalachian Trail. And oh, by the way, you got 7 miles yet to do to come down and go back to camp. So there is coming down off the mountain included. So let me stop talking, and Dave, if you could flip to the video. more slide up, Dave?
Yep.
Slide thing? Last slide. So, if you have a dream, if you have a dream that's nudging you from the inside, don't wait for somebody to make it a reality. Let the one day become day 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 186, whether it's a solo hiker or with a companion. You can create your own privilege to do some kind of cool activity like that. So thank you very much for listening to my part of the trail, my part of the presentation. I'd like to now share with you and hear from other women hikers. So if Katie and Sarah and Mary, want to come up? A lot of faces in the audience I haven't seen in a while, so I have to thank certain folks because really the skills and the trips I went on and the things I learned about the gear from the folks in this chapter over the years is what helped me get onto the AT. So I have to thank Herb Shantz, who's in the front row. He and I went on a lot of trips together. I see Dave and Laurel Newman. We went on a lot of trips together in the late 80s and 90s. Gretchen Schaus, I saw you. Are you still here? I saw Gretchen here before. She's here? Yes. Oh, yes, Gretchen. And are there other faces that did trips back then? Anyway, thank you all. I really appreciate it. So, these guys are up here, so we can ask them questions. And, what's that? No. There we go. So, first question I want to ask our panel is, why do you hike solo? And how does that compare to hiking with a group? Whoever wants to, I get to be Heather Dawson now.
So, for me, as someone who spends a lot of time guiding and educating in the wilderness with groups that I am responsible for, the big difference
Katie,
is
please use your microphone.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, not much of a projector with my voice, am I? Okay, is that better?
Yes.
A little bit of a So for me, as someone who is a guide and an outdoor educator, I spend a lot of time outdoors being responsible for others, being responsible for groups. So my solo type hiking is really a time for me to focus on myself, find some peace where I'm not worrying about others. I'm not concerned that they are safe, they're okay, they're hydrated, they're getting their nutrition. I'm not trying to educate someone else. So really it's just a much more peaceful time for me. And also there are times where I choose to hike solo for safety. And that probably sounds really weird, but as someone who does activities in the outdoors that maybe some would consider extreme, there's not a lot of other people that I trust, know, have the skills, have the fitness to do some of the things that I would like to be doing in the outdoors. And sometimes I find that it's safer to be solo because, you know, I know that I have the skills. I know that I have the confidence, and that way I don't have to worry about the other individual.
I kind of agree with what Katie's saying. You know, it's a place for me when I'm out there alone to just let my mind wander. I get some of my best thinking done when I'm by myself, just putting one foot in front of the other. Not that I, you know, don't have a great time hiking with my husband. We hike together a lot. But sometimes there's things that he may not just be interested in doing. I might, you know, not want to go bag a high peak. I want to just visit a waterfall or, you know, do a 20-mile or 15-mile out and back where you don't see much, but the woods are really pretty. So I have that opportunity to do that, you know, whatever I really want to do.
For me, I'm an introvert, and so at work I have to spend a lot of time communicating and working with others, and so and part of that is compliance and getting people to do things that they're supposed to be doing, and I don't want to do that in my personal time. I just want to kind of get out and sometimes be in my own head, forget about work, not have to worry about other people, and just time to focus on myself.
question up here, but before I go to it, does anybody in the audience have a question for these three women solo hikers? Anyone? Anyone? Next question. About safety. So regarding hiking solo, who has been asked by a friend or a family member, "What? Are you crazy?" Mary, you have
Yeah, I get asked that a lot. You know, it's not something I take lightly. Someone else asked me once when I told them, they're like, "Oh my gosh, you don't get scared at all?" Well, that's not the case. I'm scared every time I go out. But I do my research. I check into things. I make sure that I have everything that I need. I make sure that I have extra things. I take a lot of precautions. I educate myself. I took a winter wilderness first aid course. The instructor said, "Wow, you're pretty good at this. Do you looking to get your guide license?" And I said, "Oh no, this is just for me. I don't really want to help other people." But you know, I think that you know, something could always happen, but you know, you have to be as prepared as you possibly can, and you have to do your homework, and you have to be willing to put effort.
For me, where I get comfortable with hiking by myself is taking stock of the risk of any situation. You know, you could do a 2-mile hike, that's pretty simple. You could do that 15-mile hike where more things can go wrong. In the end, there's risks in everything that you do. Like Barb was saying, you know, getting into a car every day. There's weirdos everywhere. I'm more likely to probably meet weirdos on the street in Rochester than I am at the top of Allen Mountain, just because it's tough to get there. So I still have people saying that what I do is crazy, and all I can do is just tell them what I do to kind of offset that. You know, I've kind of done similar things. I've taken wilderness first aid. I know my fitness very well. I'm constantly assessing. I'm almost more aware when I'm by myself of how I'm feeling, you know, what I'm seeing on the trail, the people that I'm passing, and, you know, are they looking to come back and get me or something? I don't know. You have that anxiety, but it's just something that you work through and you get more comfortable with as you do it more.
Yeah, so I'm pretty lucky. My husband is very supportive of my adventures, no matter how crazy they sound. So I don't get a lot of pushback at this point in my hiking career. There have been a handful of times, especially when I first started going out solo, that I would get that question, especially, you know, from men in my life. And the first question I would ask myself before engaging with them is, where is this coming from? Because if it's coming from a place of true concern for my safety, then I want to engage and I want to talk to them about, you know, real risk versus perceived risk and why is other people doing this, my confidence level. But I find that sometimes people come to you and they say something like, well, you shouldn't be doing that, you shouldn't be hiking solo, what are you, crazy? And they're coming from a place of control, wanting control, or envy, or you know, just some unhealthy place where no matter what you say, it's not going to change their mind. And with those people, I generally choose to just not engage with them because it doesn't matter what I say, and it's them, it's not me. It's something that they need to work on. When I am having those conversations with people in my life that are genuinely concerned, it really does go back to perceived risk versus actual risk. So something I didn't talk about in my presentation because it wasn't really relevant is I actually have another job on top of all those jobs. I'm an industrial hygienist, and what that means is that it's my job to assess risk that has to do with human health hazards, things like biologicals, radiation, chemical hazards, things like that. I literally assess risk for a living. And so this concept of perceived risk versus actual risk goes back to what Barb and what Sarah mentioned, where statistically the most dangerous part of your solo hike as a woman is driving to and from the trailhead. Statistically, that's just data, that's not subjective. And so, you know, having those conversations with the people in your life that genuinely have concern, I think is important to really make them realize, you know, these aren't necessarily high-risk things that we're choosing to do, and it's important to our mental health. That was a long answer.
questions? Anyone? Oh, it's-
Oh, it's like, old white-haired guys get the same question. And I learned a certain woman that I worked for a number of years, the proper answer to that question is yes, and your point is?
Did everybody hear what Steve said? He
No.
says even older white, or guys with white hair get that question too. And, what did you say?
Oh,
Well, let's
they
just,
say,
let's.
how old are you? You're gonna, what? You're crazy. Yes, your point is?
Sometimes crazy brings the best happiness. Yes.
I think if I'd have made the comment that the last young lady said about ladies' driving abilities, they'd have booed at me probably, but it was all right for her to say that. The most dangerous thing for women going hiking is driving there. It's supposed to be a joke, I'm sorry.
Yeah. I don't think it's limited to their ability. I think it's the other people on the road. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
But I've not done the AT at all, but I've done quite a bit of hiking in various parts of the country and over in Europe. In all my hiking experience, I've never seen any critters, no chipmunks, no squirrels, no deer. Has your bear can ever been tested by a bear?
Well,
Or do you see wildlife that's maybe threatening to you?
can I back up?
Outside of human beings.
The AT taught me why we don't see wildlife most of the time, because being on the trail so long, I got sensitized to feeling around me. I can remember sitting on the trail up in Vermont and saying to the folks around me, we better get up, others are coming. We couldn't see the others, but I could feel the ground. I could feel somebody was coming. And same thing when I came off the trail. Irv and I went backpacking down in Pennsylvania, and we were taking a break, and I said to Irv, we better get up and get moving because the rain's coming. He goes, the rain's coming? And I'm like, yeah, I can hear it. I could sense that the rain was coming. You get used to these things when it's quiet out, and we don't have all that noise around us. And so the critters are like that. They hear us coming, they smell us, they're like, we're getting out of here. It's kind of like avoiding the hikers on the trail with antisocial behavior. The critters are avoiding us with antisocial behavior to them. Another question? Over here. Katie.
So I was just wondering if you, the panel can talk about some of the odd questions that get asked on the trail by random people when they realize that they're hiking alone and how they handle that.
So questions you get asked on the trail by random people when they find out you're hiking alone.
I'm trying to think of any specific question. I can't think of many. I'm primarily a trail runner, and I recognize that that gives me a level of privilege when it comes to interactions on trail and feeling safe, because I generally can be moving faster than anyone I don't want to be speaking with. So in a lot of cases, if I'm getting any weird vibes, I'm just gone. But generally, it's just curiosity. As long as it's friendly, I'm pretty open to it. I haven't gotten anything specific though. I know that Mary has some pretty interesting things, but for me, it's not so much what they say, it's nonverbal cues where they just seem to, people just are off sometimes, and that's when you have to trust your gut. They might just seem overly friendly, smiley, but maybe just looking you up and down, that kind of thing, just sizing you up, really, or looking around behind you to see if there's somebody with you back farther on the trail. And, maybe you feel like they're engaging you for a little too long to maybe see if someone's going to come up behind you, just seeing if you're alone. But you get kind of used to vetting those people out. And I guess what you do with that information is what keeps you safe. But, yeah, I feel like it's mostly nonverbal stuff for me, but I know that's not the case for you.
Yeah, so I've been asked some weird questions on the trail. Probably the weirdest has been on the Finger Lakes Trail. So unlike the Appalachian Trail, it is not always as busy. There are not always as many people. And when someone asks you, hey, are you hiking alone? I can't just say, George is behind me, because I haven't seen a single person all day long. And so there were actually on two separate occasions. They were guys, and I think they were just amazed that I was out there by myself, and I got the, you know, are you alone? Where's your car parked? Twice I got asked that question, and I was really kind of shocked. And basically, they just wanted to know how far I had gone. They want to know, you know, they were just curious about distance, how much I was hiking on my own, things like that. But it is a little unnerving. And like I said, when you are really kind of out there by yourself and you haven't seen a single person all day, it's a little hard to say, yeah, I'm just separated from a group, or, you know, George is behind me. So yeah, it happens. But, you know, you keep your distance, you don't get close, and you keep your answers short and just be nice.
Other questions? Anyone?
Over here.
Okay, take us first.
Do you have a plan for personal protection in that case that somebody does?
I mean, I hike with poles, but I don't pack. It's, you know, you just learn to kind of keep your distance. If you ever do take, when I took my Winter Wilderness First Aid course, they actually addressed that as a topic, and how to address kind of people who are, they put you in scenarios, and one of the scenarios is someone who ultimately is trying to stab you, you know, and they talk about keeping distance, you know, things along those lines, and you kind of learn those things.
I have a knife. That's about it.
I don't bring any protection personally. That for me goes back to just like the perceived versus actual risk. Statistically, you're much more likely to be assaulted by somebody that you know. Like that's just, you know. So I guess in some ways I rely on my ability to move quickly on trail, kind of help me from. Sorry, should have been speaking into the mic. I just kind of rely on my ability to move quickly on trail to get me out of situations, I think. But I've never, over a decade of being on trail, professionally and personally, I've never been in a situation where I felt truly physically threatened. So I think, you know, it just doesn't happen as much as maybe people fear that it might.
I don't carry anything either, because I figure if I carry it, I'm providing it for them to use against me.
Yeah.
So I'd rather not be there.
Actually, we have what suggestions do you have for increasing confidence so that you can do less?
So I'll just repeat the question because I got that feedback on lots of. So her question was, what can you do to increase your confidence on trail? And I once had someone very wise say to me, when you know, and you know, confidence replaces fear. So for me, it's all about just being confident in the skills that I need to be safe on trail, really. And once that confidence came through and I was able to test my skills, and a lot of that too was being an educator. You know a skill, and then you teach it, and you really know a skill. So even if that's in an informal capacity, teaching a friend that's interested, you really do start to feel extremely confident in those skills. So things like navigation, especially because that seems to be a big fear, is you know, getting lost, but also, you know, survival skills, just generalized, you know, hiking and backpacking skills, making sure you have the gear you need, that sort of thing. Once you have that level of confidence, I've found it just kind of naturally replaces the fear and gives you confidence to be out there.
I would say, in the simplest terms, start with something small, something that you're familiar with, and see if it feels right. Solo hiking isn't for everyone. You might never really feel totally comfortable, and you should be enjoying when you're out in the outdoors. You know, it shouldn't be a forced thing just to say, oh, I've done this hike solo just to check a box. You know, if you find that you find hiking with others more enjoyable, then come to the ADK hikes. Shameless plug, but yeah, I think you should do something that doesn't feel right. And starting small, my first couple of hikes by myself, I had this gigantic pack of things that I would never use, but it was kind of a safety blanket for me, and I've since refined my gear list, and you know, I know what I need, and I do enjoy it, so that's why I continue to do it.
Yeah, I would say education, educating yourself on different things and learning different things and different skills, starting out small and not being afraid to go out and turn around if you need to. I would say that the first time I wanted to try and do one of the high peaks by myself, I got spooked and I turned around and I saved it for another day. The trails are always there, mountains aren't going anywhere, and you know, just do what you feel comfortable.
Jack, you have a question?
Yeah, I just wondered how the use of cell phones has changed your hiking, whether it's the choices you make, whether it's mapping the building, whether it's just looking up and reading your email, or what's the place to quiet, and just read the internet.
I do take advantage of GPS where I can. I do take advantage of some of the online routes and downloading them ahead of time. I would say you'd be surprised how many places in New York State still don't have cell service, and I don't just mean in the mountains, having hiked Finger Lakes Trail, so it can't just be the only thing you fall back on. But I certainly do take advantage of the technology.
I'm kind of old school, so I don't like to take my phone out when I'm out and about. I'm kind of a paper map and compass gal. So I don't know that it's changed a whole lot for my personal time on trail, but I will say my time with guiding clients, if we're out in the winter, it definitely makes things more efficient if we're breaking trails. So they certainly appreciate that. They like to have me get them where they're going a little bit more quickly. If you aren't aware, the app called Gaia GPS, there's a free version. It's the only app that I know of that works on satellites. You actually don't need to pre-download the map. You can see where you are at all times. I've tested it pretty much everywhere in the Adirondacks and it works. So if you don't know about that app, definitely recommend downloading that.
I got one more question on here. Could you just repeat the app again? What's the app?
The app is Gaia GPS. It's GAIA GPS. Yeah.
Okay, up here, we have all heard tragic stories of people being injured or even losing their lives during a solo hike. What is one thing you do to be self-sufficient in preparation for your hike?
Yeah, I guess it goes back to like confidence in your skills. For me, navigation is huge. It's a super perishable skill. Knowing that I'm very confident in it brings me a lot of comfort and confidence when I'm out there. So I would say that's probably like, you know, there's 100 things I could list, but that's my number one thing is continuously practicing my navigation skills. You know, when I'm out there, I'm at a summit, I'm triangulating my point. I'm not relying too heavily on my phone in case something happens to it. I'll go out and do a bushwhack and make myself use a map and compass just to test that skill and to make sure that I'm really refined in it. And I'm lucky enough that I'm an outdoor educator, so I'm teaching students this on a regular basis too. But it's super important to remember that that's a very perishable skill. For me, it's first aid and knowing how to use my first aid kit, going through it regularly and familiarizing myself with where things are, how I would use each of the things, adding things that, maybe I've come across a situation where I think, well, I could use this. And honestly, I've never had to use my first aid kit for more than just the basic owies, that you get on the trail, but I have had to give pieces of that first aid kit to others that were not as well prepared. So yeah, I think that's my thing is first aid, knowing how to use my first aid, and that all helps me stay calm too when I come across a situation where that first aid is required.
Yeah, I'm a little bit of a klutz, and I kind of joke around that it's not a fun hike unless you fall at least once. So having said that, I do take first aid. I've taken first aid courses. I carry things in my pack. I'm very much aware. I let people know where I'm going. I let people know the route I'm taking. And that's really mostly what you can do.
Other questions? Then I want to cycle back and answer this gentleman's question that I didn't answer, or you guys answered. I think you asked about bear canisters, right? Did you ask about bear canisters that had gotten a bear into it?
Yeah.
And I forgot to allow that part to be answered. Have you guys had problems with bear canisters?
No,
Bears in general?
I'm not a huge backpacker, but I learned how to hang a bear bag this year. But no, I've never had an issue with a bear, and I've only seen a bear one time.
I have only seen one bear as well, and it was already on the run. I've never had an issue with a bear trying to break into food, regardless of how I had it stored. And I think that's just, especially if you have a fear of wildlife, just knowing you store your food properly, they're not going to bother you. They want your food, they don't want you. The only problem I've ever had is with what I call mini bears, chipmunks, squirrels, things like that. They get very bold. Don't leave food in your pack if you're going to drop your pack at a trail junction. They've learned that that's where hikers drop their pack and that there's food in, and they would chew a hole through your pack. I've seen it happen many times.
So any last questions or questions for me about the AT that anybody has? Yes.
How much weight did you carry?
For me on the AT, bad news is I did the approach trail, which is 8 miles with 55 pounds in my pack. I weighed it down at the park before I started. I left Springer with 50 because I sent 5 pounds back down the mountain with my support person who went up to Springer with me. When I was full coming out of town, I was around 50 pounds. In the summer months when I had a lighter sleeping bag and the town stops were closer, I would get down to 35 pounds. Yeah. And now when I got ready for the Northville Placid Trail this year, I'm getting a little older, if you can tell from my hair. I'd like to carry a little less. So for the Northville Placid Trail this summer, I weighed everything. I weighed my bandanas. Do you know they weigh differently? I weighed my polar fleece. I chose, I chose.
You all laugh. She does.
I did. I found out, the polar fleece I have been taking for years is heavier. And then it dawned on me, when I did the AT, I used a compression stuff sack. Have you guys seen a compression stuff sack for your sleeping bag? It's got like straps on it, and buckles, and heavier material. I carried that the whole way on the AT. And now I don't do that. I'm like, why did I carry that weight? Now I put my sleeping bag in a plastic bag and it goes on the bottom of my pack. And it gets scrunched down, and it still gets compressed by everything else on top of it. But I've eliminated a lot of stuff sacks and useless things that I don't need anymore. Yeah, in my pack, I still have George, and George has holes that's been patched, and George is getting a slim down too. I'm cutting off extra buckles and straps because after 30 years, I'm like, why? Why am I carrying them? I don't use them. So I'm getting lighter. But in one of the tangents I went on to, getting ready for this presentation, was reading the tangent about lightweight backpacking. And there's some articles where people are saying, be careful going lightweight because you're giving up some things that you actually need out there. So there's a lot of good articles out there about how light is, just right, and how light's too light. And a lot of people saying they're dropping a lot of weight, but they're also having a lot of miserable nights out there. So there's a trade-off. Thank you for asking. Yes, Jackson.
Barb, could you just comment briefly about the importance of hiking with a paper map instead of relying on a digital map?
Jackson says, would I really mention the importance of hiking with a paper map versus just a phone map? And God, I think that's totally important. And I don't use a phone map. I am a paper map person, and I kind of think it's like fires starting, that we're losing the skill. Our population is losing the skill to read maps. And I think we need to continue using them. So even when I drive, I still use paper maps. Though when I do use the GPS that talks to me, that's really kind of cool. But I still, I think paper maps are important. The batteries don't run out.
Yeah, I would say even though I take advantage of the phones and the GPS, I 100% have a paper map. And I 100% use it because you should see some of my FLT maps that are scrunched. I use both. I don't strictly rely on the phone at all. But I do take advantage.
Yes.
What percentage of people do the
So the question is, what percentage of people do it south to north versus north to south? And I don't know the answer to that question. Reinhardt, do you know?
It's shifting. Still a bigger proportion start from the south and head northbound. But the Appalachian Trail Conservancy is encouraging people to change that routine to avoid that big congregation of folks, starting like from mid-March to mid-April. So they're encouraging folks to maybe start somewhere at the midpoint, like at Harper's Ferry. Maybe, start by hiking north, then flipping down south, and then, doing the southern half. So there's many different options on how to do the trail. But I think still there's a bigger percentage of folks that do it from south to north.
You can actually go on the Appalachian Trail Conservancy website and see that. They'll tell you the numbers who hike it in a year and how many go from south to north and north to south. I just didn't pay attention to the numbers.
To be considered a thru-hiker, you have to do it within a certain amount of time.
Not a certain amount of time, but on one pass. So,
Come back, you can't come back.
yeah.
Take off for a year and come back.
Reiner has more than that.
The rule is you have to be considered a thru hiker. You have to complete it within a 12-month period. You can get off the trail and get back on. You can even carry over from one year to the next. But it has to be completed within a 12-month period. If you don't complete it in a 12-month period, you're what's considered an AT 2,000 mile. And there's a lot of folks that do it that way. They might hike a 100-mile section every year, for 20 years. And then they're classified as a 2,000 mile.
Yes?
Would you go back?
I think about it every now and then. The question was, would I go back? There's other trails out there too. So I personally, to be honest, I think it would be hard for me to go back to the AT because it's different. There's a lot of gadgets. There's no lines at the phone booths in town. People are calling for Uber rides at road crossings. That's not true. I've heard of somebody call home to their father to ask him where the spring was at the shelter. Think about it. Person's on the trail, they call home, ask where the spring is at the shelter on the trail. So I think it would be weird for me. There's a lot of gadgets and differences out there, and I saw a lot of that when I was searching the internet. And when I spoke with Becky about doing this presentation, she kind of chuckled at me when I said, "Wow, things are different. There's so much information on the internet, and there's so many ways to communicate. And journals now are online, and pictures are digital." When I was on the trail, I sent journal entries home to this chapter's newsletter editor, and she printed them in the Genessean, and that's how the club was following me. Where now somebody doing it can post daily, moment by moment. I would find that, I don't think I would be able to escape as much and be the sunrise hiker in another world. I would still be connected to this world a lot more than I was when I was on the trail. So, I think it would be a different experience. However, there is a UCT and the Continental Divide Trail out there, so. Okay, I see Dave standing behind me. Maybe come closer, which is what I used to do. So thank you all very much. Thanks again.
Thanks everybody for coming out. Have a good night and a safe drive back.